Hi, my name is Steve Copeland and welcome to the series on world religions and cults. In this video we will be examining the doctrines and practices of Buddhism and pointing out the multitude of contradictions in this religion. The material from this video comes from my university textbooks, Practical Systematic Theology and Religion, History and Mystery. Siddhartha Gautama, the man commonly referred to as Buddha, was born a prince around 563 BC in Nepal. Legend has it that after witnessing the suffering of the common people beyond his palace walls, he left his wife and son and went on a 6-year search for enlightenment, using yoga and meditation in the traditional Hinduism in which he was raised. He found no answers in Hinduism and concluded that the root of suffering is desire, and if one can eliminate desire, they can know freedom. There are 3 types of Buddhism: Theravada, Mahayana, and Vajrayana, difficult word to say. But firstly, let's look at Buddhist writings. The Tripitaka are said to be the first sacred writings of Buddhism. The word means 3 baskets, as they were stored in pitakas, baskets. The baskets themselves are divided into subjects, the first being the discipline basket, with its 277 regulations for monks. The second is called the discourse basket, which contains the records of Buddha's teachings and sayings, the basic theology of Buddhism. The third basket contains the special teachings, including poems, songs, and stories from the Buddha's previous lives. The Tripitaka are the writings of Theravada Buddhism. Now, Mahayana Buddhism contains around 2,184 sacred writings apart from the Tripitaka. The majority are called sutras and were developed between 200 BC and 200 AD after the split from Theravada Buddhism. The main sutra is called the Lotus Sutra and is said to be a sermon by Buddha about how to become a boddhisatva, a kind of angel helper, and how to reach Buddha nature. The Heart Sutra is also considered very important as it outlines the ideas of nirvana and emptiness. The Perfection of Wisdom Sutra speaks about emptiness, a notion which was developed further by an early Buddhist philosopher called Nagarjuna. Vajrayana Buddhism draws heavily upon all the texts I've just mentioned, but in addition uses a number of tantric texts. 2 of these texts have become quite well known in Western countries, the Great Sages of Enlightenment and the Tibetan Book of the Dead. So what about Buddhist teachings? In his first sermon, Buddha is said to have outlined what has become the foundation of traditional Buddhism, namely the 4 Noble Truths. They are these: the truth of dukkha. The word dukkha is often translated as suffering, but in fact it has a much wider meaning. Dukkha is the empty satisfaction that human beings feel, a desire for more, perhaps even a reaching out to perfection. The problem is that everything is subject to change. Nothing is permanent. Happiness can be found, but it doesn't last. Desires can be met, but then they return. Buddha's first noble truth is that we must recognize dukkha. Second, the origin of dukkha. The second noble truth is to recognize and understand the origin of dukkha, which Buddha described as craving. He categorized craving in 3 ways. 1. Sense pleasures such as sexual desires. We sense objects which we believe will provide pleasure and desire those objects. This becomes compulsive and destroys freedom of action. Desire leads to attachment. 2. New forms of existence or clinging to life, that is, the fear of death. Attachment to life brings the desire for offspring to have physical existence, both future and past. Number 3. Self-extinction. The desire to die, to be free of this world, free from life. Even desiring to be free of desire can be an attachment, and we cannot achieve freedom until we learn to be unattached. The third noble truth is the elimination of dukkha. The elimination of craving is the Buddhist desire of nirvana, one of the most difficult and perhaps contradictory ideas in Buddhism because it refers to the extinction of desire. Western minds might see this as a form of self-annihilation, but there is no self to annihilate in Buddhism. Buddha described this as blowing out a flame, but the question that the self or individual asks is, where does the flame, that is I, go? And the fourth noble truth is the path of the elimination of dukkha. This path is known as the Noble Eightfold Path. Primarily, the path is right understanding, right thought, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. Buddha's path is not a stage 1 then stage 2 idea, but a whole of life path in which each is dependent on the other. Now, before moving on to explore the 8 Noble Truths, we need to understand one of the most obvious problems in Buddha's teachings. Buddha insists that there is no God, either in the form of Brahman, as in Hinduism, or any other. He also insists that there is no self, no real individual. Now, this creates several problematic questions. Firstly, who or what determines the ideas of right understanding, right thought, speech, action, etc.? If it is Buddha who is making this determination, then are we to understand that Buddha, who says we are not individual selves, has determined these ideas? Where, if not from a man, did these ideas come from? Buddha's answer would be that we are not a permanent self. Secondly, if there is no individual self, then what is it that is trying to follow the path? In order to follow Buddha's path, a self or something, someone, must have a conscious awareness of right and wrong and make personal decisions and effort to change. Buddha taught that self is not permanent. It's just a step along the way to nirvana. How can a non-permanent or any other form of non-existent self accumulate karma in the first place? This is a real dilemma. Thirdly, if there is no God, no intelligent being of infinite wisdom who gave Buddha this path, then again, where did it come from? Also, how can ideas such as right action, thought, and effort manifest themselves out of anything other than a conscious being, a being aware of the possibility of wrong actions, thought, and effort? Predictably, Buddha never actually offers any satisfactory answer to any of these questions, which resulted in another form of Buddhism in which there is a god or gods known as boddhisattvas, enlightened spiritual beings who can guide seekers to truth. The only answer Buddha gives is that desire binds us to attachment and endless rebirth cycles. For Buddha, even desiring to do good deeds in order to accumulate karma is also an attachment. This inherent contradiction in his teaching became the subject of a huge amount of what we now call Theravada and Mahayana Buddhism. So what is this Eightfold Noble Path? From our condition of ignorance come wrong actions, which leads to bad karma, which leads to rebirths, etc. The key is a strict adherence to certain rules. The self, who only exists non-permanently on the wheel of life, enters into a strict regime of self-discipline in order to be the catalyst of positive cause and effect. Buddha gave 10 basic precepts. Non-monks must obey the first 5, and monks all 10. 1. Do not harm any living thing. 2. Do not steal. 3. Do not be sexually immoral. 4. Do not use wrong speech. 5. Do not use drugs or drinks which cloud the mind. 6. Do not eat after midday. 7. Do not dance, sing, listen to music, or go to the theatre. 8. Do not wear garlands, perfumes, cosmetics, or jewelry. 9. Do not have a luxurious bed or one which is above the ground. And 10. Do not accept gold or silver. Cause and effect is very important in Buddhist thinking. Everything that exists only exists because of something before it. If the monk is producing right causes, then the end result will be right effects. For Buddha, there is no single cause to anything. The flame burns because of the oil, but without the oil there is no flame. The flame is therefore reliant on the oil. However, if we believe in gods such as Brahman, we will rely on them, even need them as the flame needs the oil. If you rely on God, you will be dissatisfied, so you must rely only on yourself. One of Buddha's most famous sayings was, "All composite, that is permanent things, pass away. Therefore, strive for your own salvation with diligence." Theravada Buddhism tried to keep to Gautama's idea that there is no God, no permanent self, and therefore salvation is solely up to the individual. This teaching is referred to as the first turning of the wheel. The second main branch of Buddhism, known as the second turning of the wheel, is Mahayana Buddhism. The first is considered the broad path and the second the narrow path. Mahayana Buddhism teaches a belief in creatures known as bodhisattvas. These are thought to be enlightened beings that are perhaps similar to the Western idea of angels. These bodhisattvas are said to have stored up huge amounts of good karma through their previous earthly lives, and after being joined to a person, can help them find enlightenment. Consider these 7 fundamental differences in Theravada and Mahayana Buddhism. T for Theravada and M for Mahayana. T1, psychology and philosophically realistic. The world is real and suffering is real. M1, psychologically idealistic. Ideas are more important than things. Suffering is not quite real. T2, denies any absolute being behind phenomena or existence. No God and even no self. M2, most believe in an absolute being behind phenomena, a source of absolute wisdom and truth. T3, Buddha was only a man. M3, Buddha was a projection of the absolute being and therefore a God who can answer your prayers. T4, salvation is completely through self-effort. There are no spiritual beings to help or guide you. And M4, salvation can be helped by others. These are bodhisattva saviors such as Buddha. In T5, strict interpretation of karma is connected to individual action. And M5, karmic merit, that is stores of good karma, can be transferred to others by a spiritual joining to that other entity. And T6, the goal is nirvana, the annihilation of dukkha, suffering, craving, and desires. In M6, the goal is to become a bodhisattva and help others to find salvation. Nirvana is to become conscious of your salvation. And finally, T7, it is rationalistic and individualistic and sober. One must become a monk before being enlightened. And M7, attitude to life is to be emotionally happy, have concern for others. One doesn't need to become a monk, can marry, etc. So finally, my critique. Buddha considered that there is no God, but rather a concept of absolute which he considered to be neither a real being nor a creator designer. For Buddha, nothing is permanent. Everything continues in a state of flux. Human beings come into existence through cause and effect. They appear in the wheel of life and disappear into the absolute nothingness as the wheel turns. The absolute is assumed to be like perfect energy yet without a personality. Therefore, this absolute is nothingness and also everythingness. It has no beginning or end. This is why he insisted that the self as an individual doesn't exist. We are only part of this absolute. This philosophy raises several fundamental contradictions. Number 1, karma is a system which relies on the foundation that there is a difference between good and evil. But if there is no creator God, and the absolute has no personality, who determined right and wrong, and where did such ideas come from? If the absolute has no personal moral code, then why should right actions be considered any more beneficial than evil ones? And if good and evil do not actually exist, then how can karma exist? Number 2, what is the goal of life? For Buddha, the goal of life is to eliminate dukkha, that is, suffering. This sounds very noble, especially if it is to help the suffering of others. But who are these others? They are expressions of the absolute nothingness. They only think they exist because there is no self, no individual in Buddha's teaching. In truth, a non-existent self is helping another non-existent self to alleviate a suffering which is an illusion. Why, if we are not real selves, should we want to help other non-selves? This teaching gives no solid answers to a person seeking any goal in life. We strive to be good, to accumulate good karma, only to lose our individuality in the great nothingness as the wheel turns. Number 3. Dukkha is described by Buddha as a feeling of dissatisfaction, an emptiness within. He concluded that we come into existence from this perfect absolute and are returning to it again on the wheel of life. This explains our feeling of imperfection. The problem is how the perfect absolute could suddenly begin manifesting itself imperfectly, and why, if it has been through this entire process, the wheel of life, before, would it start all over again? Where's the purpose in this? It would seem that this absolute never learns from its mistakes and never learns to stop accumulating bad karma. Without a God, creator, designer, there is no explanation for morality, no goal to strive for, indeed, no real reason to even be here in the first place. And number 4, Theravada developed into Mahayana and then into Vajrayana. Theravada concentrated on the individual self as the sole means of salvation, of trying to find enlightenment, but did anyone ever reach the goal of eliminating desire? The answer is no. Therefore, Mahayana Buddhism insisted that participants need bodhisattvas to help them and use yoga arsenas to be joined to these beings. The word yoga means to yield, and especially to yield to a spiritual being and be united to that being. This is simply demonic possession, which in reality brings various spiritual experiences and power, however, neither freedom nor the elimination of desire. Vajrayana Buddhism, which produced the Tibetan Book of the Dead, practiced the idea of eliminating desire by joining oneself to those desires, especially those which are forbidden. Poisons, extreme sexuality, murder, and even eating human flesh, with the idea that once we have done the forbidden, we will no longer desire what is forbidden because we have embraced it. In summary, in Buddhism we see a progression. Buddha told his students to work out their salvation, but could not answer the most fundamental questions regarding the origin of desire, evil, or good. This led students to use yoga asanas to join themselves to spiritual beings for answers, and for some, indulging in forbidden practices guided by those very beings. Many Westerners have this romantic and naive understanding of Buddhism. They see the monks sweeping the ground with a broom as they walk in order to make sure they don't step on an insect. They interpret this as a wonderful respect for all life. However, in truth it is utterly self-centered, as is everything in Buddhism. In reality, the monk believes that if he accidentally kills an insect, it will produce bad karma, and he will have to relive his ascetic lifestyle all over again to reach the same level of enlightenment he's been working so hard to complete. The Buddhist is forever evaluating his own performance, and the one fundamental area he can never conquer is pride. He or she may appear to be meek, mild, and humble, but in evaluating their performance as having even a limited success, they have indeed simply elevated personal pride. Such is the outcome of every religion which is focused on self, and the elevation of self is the fundamental root of all sin. I hope this video has been enlightening for you. Please remember to like and subscribe, and also please share it with those who you feel may benefit from learning about Buddhism. God bless.